There are a lot of people who think that sports are just sports. And for a lot of people, that's true. But that's never been the case for me. I grew up down in Nebraska as a pig farmer, so I'm going to take you back to Thanksgiving Day, 1971. It's the day that the Nebraska Cornhuskers, #1 in the country, are taking on the Oklahoma Sooners, #2 in the country, in the football game of the century. We would have liked to watch the game on television, but my dad and I actually had planned that we were taking hogs to Chicago to show in the International Expo. So the entire day was planned out. We hopped in the truck, we loaded the truck the night before, we hit the road at about 5 a.m. so that we can hit the Stuckies for breakfast for their caramel rolls. We're rolling down the road in this 1968 Ford pickup with the box, panels on the back to keep the hogs in. We eat dinner at a small diner in Iowa somewhere, and we had it all timed out to be able to listen to the Husker game. Now, for those of you that don't know what the dedication is to Nebraska football, especially back in the 70s and 80s, there is an unwritten rule in Nebraska. Pray nothing catches fire during a Husker game, because no one is coming to help you. So with that in mind, we have it all timed out. And back then, not every game was on television. Now you could get, 35 football games a weekend on television. Back then, that was not the case. So this is actual Thanksgiving Day. Well, Dad had it all timed out. The good news is we're actually rolling down the road, and the game is taking a little longer. We're listening on KFAB radio, a big blowtorch radio station. My dad and I used to spend an awful lot of time listening to the radio. In the basement of our house, we'd listen to Husker games. I think this is how I became enamored with the idea of being a radio announcer. I've wanted to do it since I was about 9 or 10 years old. Well, we're driving down the road on our way hauling these hogs to Chicago. And all of a sudden, we're driving out of the coverage area. And this is a great game. I mean, it's unbelievable. So we're hearing about every 2 out of 3 words. Now, I love my dad like nobody else. However, sophistication was not usually used to describe my dad. So as we are driving down the road on our way with this load of hogs traveling to Chicago to show them, my dad, since we're running out of coverage, doesn't pick a rest area, doesn't pick an off-ramp. He just pulls to the side of the interstate on Thanksgiving Day so that we can catch the end of this game. Now, of course, we both sit there staring at the radio. Because everyone knows that staring at the radio makes you hear it better. We are completely oblivious to the holiday traffic that is rifling past us. By golly, the Huskers win, 35-31, still considered one of the greatest games in history, and we happily motor down the road. We get to Chicago, and there are 4 things that stand out for me from that weekend. First of all, for those of you that have shown hogs or cattle or sheep, if you haven't, then I need to describe the fact that when you show these, you're against, other competitors, and you want your animal to look the best. If you're showing sheep, you want, the sheep to fluff up. You fluff up the wool. For the cattle, you comb it all out, make them look good. Well, the hogs that we had were black. I am willing to bet that my dad and I that weekend were the first and the last people who have ever stopped into the neighborhood barbershop to buy Afro Sheen. As a matter of fact, I'm telling that story now. I bet they're telling that story now too. We went to a Chicago Bulls game, my first ever NBA game. Now, when I say we went, we were in the second row from the top, all right? But what I remember is my dad jammed up against this metal beam in the old Chicago Stadium so that I could have a better view. And I was a big fan of the NBA. I remember the starting lineup for the Bulls. I remember that their front line was Tom Bowerwinkle and Chet Walker and Butterbean Love, and we need more nicknames like Butterbean. And their backcourt was unbelievably underrated. Norm Van Leer and Jerry Sloan. Incredible lineup. San Francisco, who they were playing, had Nate Thurmond. And Nate Thurmond was one of my favorite players. And so that night, I became a San Francisco Warrior fan. And to this day, I'm a Golden State Warrior fan. I didn't know they were going to stink for 35 blessed years, but but I made the investment and I've stuck with it. Now, and as I say, when we saw an NBA game, Chicago Stadium was huge. I think if we would have turned around, we probably would have had a better view of South Bend, Indiana than the actual court. But I also remember that was the weekend that I told one of my first smart-ass remarks. There was a group of grade school kids that were touring the International Expo. And they're coming through, and I'm cleaning up the hogs, feeding and watering them and stuff. And I remember there's this kid, and I'm only, 12 years old at this time, but there's this kid, probably 7 or 8, this group from school. And they asked, how old are the hogs? Well, prime time for showing hogs is when they're about 9 or 10 months old. So I said 9 months, and the kid looked at me and goes, well, how big do they get when they're 20 years old? And for some reason, my 12-year-old brain goes, big as a house. Later on in life, it dawned on me that there was a group of students that went through Chicago public schools that were picturing herds of hogs moving across the plains like a parade of Winnebago trailers. But what I remember most is the fact that at the International Expo, there were dairy cows, there were pigs, sheep, horses, etc. They were all in separate areas, but in the middle was an adjoining hallway. We all know what those 5 or 6 different animals smell like, right? On their own. The cacophony of stench that gathered in that hallway is something I can still smell to this day. We got back home, and in January of 1972, our lives changed. My sister came down, and she was teaching her first year of grade school, and she was diagnosed with a terminal disease, a very rare terminal disease, given a couple years to live. Now, the good news is, through grace and her own doggedness, she is still with us. Some 45 years later. As a matter of fact, we take her to games. But so when I hear people talk about the fact that sports are just sports, I have to disagree. Because for me, sports are always going to be pickup trucks at the side of the road, bad seats at basketball games, lying to grade schoolers, the goddamnedest smell I've ever had in my life, and my dad. Thank you.